Hey, welcome back to Rust Water Garage, and it is day 28 of the 51 Hudson build. So today I think goal will be finish the brake lines and maybe dump some fluid in it. I don't think I'm going to bleed them today, but I just want to get the hardware done because I really want to get this thing started. So I want to try to get just the last couple things off the list before I can actually fire this thing up, which is, of course, a great motivation when you always get your project started. So let's get going on it. All right, first thing I'm going to do today is run the rear brake line from that hose down along the frame, through the frame, which is the body. See if I can get it to come along here where I have the fuel lines up over the frame and up to the proportioning valve up there. So that's the plan. And then get all this stuff strapped up. And then I think I'm going to make a shield that bolts to the bottom of the car here and just kind of wraps up. Just as like a kind of a gravel guard for the fuel lines. Since they're on the outside of the car. But there was really no good place further in on the car to run them and not be close to exhaust or drive shaft or that kind of stuff. So, all right, so I'm going to do that first. I'm going to feed through a line and see how we're looking. This is what I'm using. 25-foot roll of 1/4-inch nickel copper. Comes with fittings. It's like $15. I mean, you just can't beat it. Such a deal. So we get that into the car. All right, one more thing off the list. 1/4-inch brake line from proportioning valve up over the frame and along the outside of the frame like factory. Fuel lines tied up to it through the frame. It should be okay. It's out of the way of the fuel filter. All right. Yeah, that's fine. Through there. Clip. And up to the rear hose. All right, that's it. Now I'll start doing the front hoses or front lines, all 3/16. Next thing I got to do before I can do the brake lines is gotta make brackets for the hoses because they're just kind of flopping in the breeze. Nothing special, got to get those done. While I'm under here, just doing a quick review. I just put some extra clamps on the fuel lines, made sure they're all tied up, everything's good. Everything is below or above, I should say, the frame rails of the rocker, so nothing will scrape. Everything looks good and tidy under here. The only thing I may revisit is the shock mounts, because since I raised the axle 2 inches, they are now below the scrub line, and I trimmed off my U-bolts. So they're above the scrub line. You really don't want anything below the rim or so, because if you get a flat tire, you wouldn't want that digging into the ground. And that's what's going to happen with those. So I think I may just cut these off and flip them up 180 or make my own new tabs off of there for the shocks just to get them up above the scrub line. But other than that, that's not going to stop me from driving the car right now. We'll get that done. I guess if I dig the shock into the ground, if I get a flat in the first times I'm driving the car, it'll just be easier to get a jack under it, I guess. As long as no one comes after me for destroying the road, right? All right, so I'm happy with it. It's coming along. Let's get the brackets made for the front brake hoses. Let's see here. First thing I got to do, I got my brake hoses here from the calipers. I got to get them mounted up there on the frame. Whenever you take a jag out of a car, I cut the whole thing right out of the car like that so I can save the mounting nuts and stuff for the hoses. I usually replace these hoses. They're cheap on Rock Auto, but this was out of a running, driving car, so I'm hoping they're still good. So I'm just going to trim a little bit around here to get a little bit more of an opening. See, I just plasmed this earlier to get the jag in, and yeah, I'm going to clean that edge up and cut out a little bit in there. So trim that opening out, and then I'm just going to make a little tab to hold my hose somewhere around there on the frame. Just some, I figure 1.5 inch by 1.5 inch, 90 bend, and 1 inch wide pieces of scrap. Get those cut. Here's all you need. Just a couple tabs out of scrap with a hole drilled in them. I'll put a couple tack welds on that right there. And that's all that's needed to mount the brake hoses. Open this up a little bit. All right, cleaned up that shape a little bit. And I got a spot to put my brake line. This one I'll probably put back a little bit. Not much, just a little, because of the exhaust manifold being right there because the engine's offset. All right, that's that. We got brake hoses. Of course, you want to turn the steering both directions, make sure nothing's binding up or hitting anything. And that'll come out right there. And run that along the frame rail over the other side. So all that's left now is to make some more brake lines. All right, first two brake lines are done for the fronts. Add a proportioning valve to left front, right front. And also, the only reason I'm running proportioning valve is because I'm running discs up front and drums in the back. If you're running four-wheel disc brakes or four-wheel drum brakes, you do not need a proportioning valve. In fact, if you buy one of these items here, these units for four-wheel discs, there is no proportioning in it, or should not be. It's just a distribution block. So yeah, this is needed for this situation, but really not needed other than a distribution block for four-wheel drums or four-wheel discs. Do not put a true proportioning valve if you're running four-wheel drums or four-wheel discs. So next thing I had to do is run the lines from the master cylinder down to the proportioning valve. And this is where it gets mix and match, because I'm going to have double flares down at the proportioning valve, and up here at the master, this stuff's newer metric stuff, so it's going to be bubble flare, which looks like that. Not a double flare, it's a bubble flare. Doesn't want to focus in on that item right there, but anyway, if you have line nuts that look like that with the unthreaded portion on the end, that's metric, and there you can get a look at what a bubble flare looks like. Not a double flare. So the only way I could do that is with obviously a special tool, and that's why I bought the Master Cool set. So this is the Master Cool hydraulic set that I've been making the brake lines with. The only thing it doesn't come with is this guy. This is a cleaner It's got a pointed end on one end to clean out the end of the line you just cut. And then this side cleans the outer diameter of it, so you get nice flares. I'll show you how that works in just a minute. But yeah, these things are a little pricey, but if you're going to do bubble flares or push lock fittings, which is the other thing I wanted to be able to do for the fuel lines, you really have to get something like this. It's well worth it. They work great. All right, let's get the last 2 lines made. All right, so I'm going to make the last brake line, which is a double flare on one side and a bubble flare on the other. I found some 3/16 line I'm going to use. It's got a bend on the end I don't like, so I'm just going to trim this back a little bit. When you use these tubing cutters, don't crank the snot out of it. You just snug it up, do a turn, snug it up, let the blade do the work. Otherwise, you're going to distort the end of the tube. It makes it just harder to get a good flare. So you just spin it till it feels loose. You know the blade cut in. Give it a little turn, put some tension on it. Till you get through. All right, one more and we'll be there. All right. There we go. Then when you cut the tube, the end of it's going to be a little messy, I guess you could say. That's where this guy comes in. Take the pointed end, put it in the tube. Work it around. It'll open that up. Get you a better surface for the double flare. And then on the outside of the tube, that side cleans up the outside of the tube. Now I just trimmed this back and I'm still in a little bit of a bent spot. I'll see if the die will straighten that out or not. We'll see. So I'm going to take the Master Cool tool. I'm working with 3/16 line here, so I'm going to put the 3/16 die in the tool. Put the 3/16. Sorry, that was, I don't know if you want to call that a die or what you want to call it. I guess it's a die. This is the 3/16 tubing holder. And then they have, the newer ones have this little kind of door here. It's a stop. So if you just put it like that, now when you slide the tube in, it hits this, and you know how that's how far it has to go in. So I'll just hold that with my thumb so it's like that. Put the tube in till it slides down and hits that door. Crank this down. That's that. We'll see how this looks because the tubing had that little bend on the end. If it's no good, I'll cut it off, but it's best to start with as straight a tube as you can. All right, and you open up that little door, and now you can see inside the tubing is at the correct depth, which is basically even with the bottom of the form there. We'll spin this till it bottoms out, tighten the nut, and then use the handle to crush that tool into the die there. Back it out and remove that tool. And that's the first part of the double flare you can see in there. And you've already noticed, because I'm doing this on a video, I forgot to put the nut on the line. Luckily it's a cut line, so it doesn't matter. Second part of the double flare is a cone. Get that in there. Spin it till it bottoms out. Tighten the nut. Crunch it. Now I don't crunch the snot out of this no matter what tool you're using. If it's a handheld tool or this tool, I don't crush this to death, because what I want is the piece that you're threading this into has an inverted flare on it with a cone shape. I want this to match the fitting that we're screwing into. So if I put this most of the way but don't crush the snot out of it, when I tighten the nut down, it'll finish the double flare. All right, loosen the nut, back this out. That out. And there's our double flare. If you keep the tubing nice, say clean it and use that tool there to clean the ends, you'll get a good double flare pretty much every time. Now I'm going to straighten out this coil since I forgot to put the nut on the line. You know, when I made the lines without the video, that never happened. Got to double check everything when you're doing videos, let me tell you. Good thing I got this old junk Tahoe parked here to work out of. All right. So, this is the nut I'll be using. That on there. Now we'll head over to the car. All right, so what I'm doing is kind of following the shape that I put into my left front wheel line, and I'm just kind of following that along and then coming up and circling in. Now, one thing on this setup here, I'm using this Z28 master cylinder here. I have not been able to find the plumbing diagram that proves which one of these outlets is for the front and which one is for the rear. Older stuff that I've dealt with, if you had two different size reservoirs, you always knew the bigger one went to the disc brakes. But these have the same size, so it's harder to find out what's what. And they had an ABS module, so there was no true proportioning valve like this, so tracing things was not as easy. What I'm going to do is assume, and assume could bite me, that the rear port goes to the front brakes and the front port goes to the rear brakes, only because my similar vintage Caprices that I've used, like I used a 95 Caprice setup on my 55 Buick or Roadmaster, whatever it was, this is B-body. That's how those are set up. So I'm just going to assume that's the way it goes and copy that. So since I've already pretty much established my routing, I'm going to copy it again. And because I had to because I had to unroll this line, it's going to be harder to do. So I think I'm going to roll it back up so it's easier to work with. All right, so I rolled this up so it's a little easier to work with, and I just started making the bends by hand, which is what's nice about nickel copper line. It's pretty simple to work with. And what I'm going to do is just bend this up out of the way, and I'm going to set this down in here, get an idea of what I'm looking at to follow my other line. Put a little bit more bend in this. Nickel copper's nice to work with, I must say. It's really easy. Get this out of the way. Let's see. Let me get this. This may be a little too high. Bend this back. I'm going to bend this up a little bit by hand and bring you back. All right, I'm just working the lines by hand to get them about where I want them to be. Just so it doesn't look like total garbage, but, you know, they are just brake lines. It's not that big a deal. I have some of these separators that were on the the factory F-body line there. Okay. All right, we're getting there. So now the only thing left to do is mark how long I need this line to be so I can cut it. So to see how long I want this line to be, I know I'm going to have to bend this line and make it turn into the master here. So I'll take a scrap of the old line that I know is the right length, and I'll mark where my curve's going to start, and then I'll just mark that extra length of the tube. And now I know how much longer I want my line to be to have enough to make the bend. So I'll cut it here, and this will be a bubble flare on this end. So I got my mark I made on this line here. I'm going to cut it. I'll use this. Hopefully, this will be doable. If not, just tubing. And this time, remember not to forget to put the nut on the line. All right, metric nut. No threads on the end there. It's real bright out here. All right, get that on there. Now, we're going to use the ISO 4.5 millimeter die here in the tool. And we're going to use a corresponding tool for that, again, which is, this is 4 millimeter ISO. So the tool says 4 millimeter, the die says 4.5, but you know, it's the smallest one in the kit. I use this for this. If you had to do a 1/4 inch flare or bubble flare, I use a 6 millimeter. But this is the, get this, the box says 4.75, the die says 4.5, and the tool says 4. So, you know, let's just call it a 4. So I'm going to set the line in there up against the stop. Crunch this. Now, this is only a 1-step deal, whereas a double flare, you have to use the cone afterwards. This is just this fitting. And it's a tight fit into the 3/16 line, because it's really not truly metric, but it works. You tighten that up, crunch it. Okay. The only thing is, because that die fits tight, when I back off my tool, it wants to stick. So I'm going to get a little shot with the hammer there, tap it down, and it'll come out. All right, get that off. And there's our bubble flare. All right, see if we can make this work. All right, so the metric end, I have to have that loop in it. I'm just going to bend that a little bit, and I'll adjust it as needed. See if I can get this started. Let's thread it into the bottom first. Bend in it. All right, there we're good. All right, go like that. Now, Thread this in. And we tighten up the bottom. That's a 7/16 down here. And then the top, because it's metric, is a 12mm. That. And then I'm just going to bend this a little bit to kind of match my original lines. Make that follow that somewhat. If I can. I'll have to look at it from your side to see how ugly or ugly it isn't. And we got a little separator here to snap like that. Looks all right. Not horrible. Nice thing about this nickel copper is you can tweak it. I think that looks pretty good. Good enough for me.